smooth trajectory narrative through the terrain here. Instead, I've thrown up a bunch of isms on the board, and we're just going to go through each of the isms, okay? And these are all sort of clumped together, all right? Obviously, no single person, if they're being consistent, is going to belong to all of these isms, okay? But nevertheless, these all sort of have to do with each other. And so we have this sort of loose network of camps, okay, that have a lot of overlap, and you should be able to, I think, fairly easily see why they have to do with each other, okay? And this all falls under the heading of naturalism, okay? With any ism, by the way, you can kind of usually start the definition of an ism with the belief that blah, 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 okay? So naturalism is the belief that all that is natural. Okay. Everything which exists is natural. Okay. What that means, of course, negatively, the flip side of that, is just the denial that there is anything supernatural. Okay. One way to understand this camp or this worldview, or I think this is the easiest way to understand why people think this way, is a basic attitude or orientation or distaste for spooky stuff. Okay? I think at rock bottom, the naturalist is a person who doesn't want anything spooky in their worldview. They don't want to believe in anything weird or spooky or, okay, not sort of firmly within the bounds of the purely natural. Looks like Rachel had a question.
What was the definition that you gave for mysticism? Remember that?
Yeah, mysticism is mysticism really, actually, this is kind of an ism that just breaks my rule. It's more of a practice or an emphasis that's placed on direct encounter with the divine.
Okay. So
direct experience of the divine.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, if I were to formulate it as a doctrine, it would be something like the position that direct encounter with the divine is the most authoritative or most important aspect of religion, as opposed to the institutional or mediated forms of religious life. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, does that answer the question? Yeah. Mysticism is not belief in spooky stuff. It's not the opposite of naturalism. Yeah. Okay. So naturalism, I think, again, to circle us back, is most easily understood as a stance or as a basic rock bottom attitude towards the world. Okay? It's a faith that the world is ultimately explicable, and it is this world. Like, this world is reality, and there's nothing outside of that, there's nothing beyond that, there's no other spiritual world, there's no extra transcendent spiritual dimension of things, because all of that is weird, spooky, I don't understand it, we don't get it, it's not explicable in concrete, rational terms. Okay, so to hell with it. Just ditch that, just pitch it overboard from our understanding of the world. Okay, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? To view this sympathetically, right, throughout the history of mankind, there have been lots of charlatans, okay? There have been lots of cranks, lots of kooks, lots of people who have taught lots of all kinds of weird things, and existence of any number of things, and oftentimes they're out for money, okay? Oftentimes people push all kinds of weird snake oils, okay? And you do that enough times, you cry wolf enough times, and you build up sort of a hardness, a cynicism towards, okay, no, I'm just done with all the snake oils. Okay, I'm done with all the stories about big men in the sky. I'm done with faith cures. I'm done with spirit medicine. I'm done with acupuncture. I'm done with, just all the spooky stuff. Okay, and so I'm going to believe just the facts. Okay, unless you can prove it to me with hard evidence, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I don't want to believe it. Okay, does everybody see that? So again, what I'm trying to emphasize is that it's more of an attitude than a definite belief. Okay, now why does it matter? Let's go through these. These three are actually different isms. Sometimes they get used interchangeably in the literature. Okay, but amongst the people who use these terms more carefully, these actually mean different things. Okay, and what I hope to show is that there is a sort of progress, historically speaking, from materialism to physicalism, and the fact that there was a shift, I think reveals that what we're really dealing with is more of an attitude than a set of definite beliefs. Okay? Now, so let me explain. Materialism, okay, is the belief that everything which exists is matter. Stuff. Okay? The only thing that is material. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That means that at rock bottom, the only thing that makes up Jonah is little bits of stuff. However we ultimately understand that. Okay? But what does that also mean? It also means that, look, if electricity is going to be something, then it's going to have to be stuff, little bits of stuff. If magnetic fields are going to be something, they've got to be little bits of stuff. If gravity is going to be something, it's got to be stuff. Because I've committed myself to the view that the only thing that exists is stuff. Okay? So, for instance, when Newton first came out with his theory, a lot of people objected to it. They said it was sorcery. Okay? They said it was occultism. Because Newton posited action at a distance. Fields of force. Okay? And people objected to that. They said, no, that's spiritualism. Why? Because you have included something in the system that isn't stuff. A field is not a kind of stuff. Okay? Now, as the system caught on, however, and lots of people saw, oh my gosh, actually this works really well. It predicts, in fact, like the motions of the planets, and predicts perfectly, like when I throw a ball, and it's so beautiful and elegant. Maybe there's something to this. People still didn't want to give up on materialism, and so they posited something called gravitons. Anybody ever heard of a graviton? Yeah, a graviton is a theoretical particle that's a particle, a little bit of something, that communicates gravity from one planet to another planet. Now, why would you include that in your theory? Well, you would include it only because you're committed to the existence of gravity now, I guess, because you have to be. And I'm still committed to the idea that the only thing that exists is stuff. And so we can't have any fields, forces. It's got to be stuff. Okay, does that make sense? So that's materialism. And strictly speaking, that's when philosophers use materialism in a technical sense. That's often what they mean. But that's not what, commonly in the literature when people say materialism, that's not what they mean.
Energies.
Well, that's the point. If you're a materialist, you would have to explain even energy as being a kind of stuff.
So you're saying they just determined that matter is a form of.
Sorry?
So when we determined in the 20th century that matter is a form of energy, that was another thing that kind of twisted materialism.
Well, but again, you could just flip it around. And you could say, actually, we discovered that energy was a form of matter. Right?
So that did fit with materialism. That did really shape.
You could force it to fit with materialism. But I hope to show in my next comments that actually it's kind of a forced fit, right? Even gravitons, right? Like nobody's ever observed a graviton. We have no experimental data for it. The only reason to believe in gravitons is just if you're like hardcore committed to materialism, not as a scientific thesis, but as a philosophical thesis. Okay. But you can kind of see how it's a little bit ad hoc, right? Like, really? You believe in lots of little particles flying between us all the time, only in order to account for gravity? Right? That's kind of really, it really seems like the evidence is in that not everything in the universe is bits of stuff. That there are things like magnetic fields, that there is such things as like energy, that light, in many ways, in some ways it does kind of seem like a kind of stuff, but in a lot of other ways it kind of seems like not. Okay? So it kind of seems like if you're going to cling to this hardcore materialism thesis, that you're just being really dogmatic and like really pushing in the face of the evidence. Okay? So, new theory, physicalism. Okay? Physicalism is a little bit more technical, okay? And it is the thesis that the only kinds of things that exist are the things necessarily posited by the physical sciences. All right, I'll say it again. Physicalism is the thesis that the only things which exist are the things necessarily posited by the physical sciences. Okay? So if physics requires the existence of atoms for its best theory, then atoms exist. If physics requires the existence of gravitational fields of force for its best theory, then gravitational fields of force exist. If physics requires entropy for its best explanation, then entropy exists. If physics requires you name it. Okay, then it exists. Okay, if chemistry requires the existence of, I don't know, name some molecule, Mike. Strychnine. If chemistry requires a complex molecule, then that exists. Okay, does this make sense? Physicalism is this thesis that the only things that exist are the things that are necessarily posited by the physical sciences. Okay? Does this make sense to everybody? So, shorthand, very simple. Okay. If science talks about it, then it exists. If science doesn't talk about it, then it doesn't exist. So what sorts of things wouldn't exist? Ghosts, spirit cures, fairies, leprechauns, God, the soul. Okay? Because science doesn't need to talk about those things in order to do its work. Make sense? Okay, now, so what's going on there? Okay.
Just updating your materialism.
What?
You're just updating your materialism.
Yeah, you're just updating your materialism, exactly. Which is basically like, hey, look, it seems like we have really good empirical data which suggests that there really are things to this universe that aren't just like stuff. Okay? And so, and now to cover our bases, rather than give like a definite list of, okay, these are the things that I believe in. I believe in stuff, and I believe in fields of force. There's now kind of a hedging of our bets, because it's like, well, you know, who knows, in 20 years science might discover something else that's kind of weird. Maybe it doesn't fit into those categories, but like, all along, what I really meant was not so much that I'm committed to only the existence of stuff. What I'm really committed to is I only want to believe in the things that science reveals. And I don't want to believe in all the spooky stuff. Okay? So I think that shift in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century, so it was kind of a slow shift and there were lots of battles. Okay? That shift, I think, reveals that the underlying attitude in this group of people is, again, really more just, okay, I only want to believe in things that have hard evidence and I don't want to believe in spooky stuff. Okay? So science, whatever you tell me exists, that's what I believe in, and nothing else. Okay, does this make sense? Yeah? All right, now there is an extra version, which you should know about, which is called, add the word reductive. Physicalism. Okay? Now, what reductive physicalism, that added word reductive, what that means is I'm only going to believe now in the things that I cannot reduce to other things. Okay? Let me give a very simple example. Very smart people like Boyle and Watt, we were talking about earlier, discovered a long time ago that heat just is the mean kinetic energy of all the particles in a body of gas or in a liquid or something, okay, in a physical body. Okay, does everybody understand what I mean when I say that? Everybody have enough science? I don't have to, okay? You have a bunch of atoms or molecules flying around. If they go faster, what that means is the body is hotter. And if on average they're slower, that means it's colder. Everybody, yeah? Okay, so heat, temperature, is nothing other than mean kinetic, actually heat, temperature is the mean kinetic energy in a body. Okay, that's what heat is. Okay, and so now if I'm just a physicalist, and I don't say reductive, I might say, yeah, I believe in temperature. Temperature is a real thing. Science talks about it. Okay, but if I say I'm a reductive physicalist, what that means is I don't really believe in temperature. I mean, we say temperature because that's like a nice shorthand for mean kinetic energy, but really temperature is nothing. All that there really is mean kinetic energy. Okay, does everybody see how that works? And the effort is always to reduce, particularly to microphysics. Okay, so the effort is always to reduce biology to chemistry, chemistry to physics, and all the rest of physics to microphysics. That's the consistent effort. Okay, and surprising, in the philosophy of science, a lot of people think that this can't be done. That this is not a possible endeavor. You can't actually succeed at reducing biology to chemistry. You can't actually succeed at reducing chemistry to physics. And even within physics, a lot of people think that we know actually that you can't reduce general relativity to quantum mechanics. But a lot of people have this sort of faith that we will someday have what's called GUT, the Grand Unified Theory. Okay, that somehow will one day reduce everything to the interactions of the smallest particles. Okay, and whatever that turns out to be, the reductive physicalist says that's the thing that really exists, is the smallest particles and their interactions. And everything else, all that is just a shorthand way of describing what's going on at that lowest level of reality. And by lowest level, I mean literally smallest level. Okay. Does this make sense? Yeah? Okay. Now, this is related to a philosophical position called scientism, which is the view that science is the only source of truth. Okay, it's almost a religious position. It's the position that there is no other. So I need to be careful here to make sure you understand. There's a difference between science and scientism. Science is a method. Does everybody understand that? Science is the method that says, hey, come up with a hypothesis, come up with a way of testing that hypothesis with control variables, independent variables, and dependent variables. Gather a bunch of data using that experimental method, okay, then see whether that confirms or denies your starting hypothesis. That's the scientific method. In short, there's more to it, okay? Science can also be a body of beliefs okay, which is our current best set of hypotheses. But of course, that's always changing. Okay, every day we alter some of those hypotheses on the basis of new incoming data. Okay, so the word science can have both of those meanings. It can either refer to the method for confirming hypotheses, or it can refer to the body of hypotheses that have currently been best confirmed. Okay? But scientism is actually a philosophical belief, and it's not actually part of science at all. The philosophical belief that that method is the best, or maybe the only valid epistemic method. It's the only way to get knowledge. And so therefore, that current set of hypotheses that are the best confirmed hypotheses, those are the only things that a rational person should believe. Right? Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, side note, let me throw another low. Scientism itself is not a hypothesis that's ever been confirmed by science. So if you're a hardcore, if you see, you can't say scientist because that just means somebody who does science. If you are somebody who sort of hardcore subscribes to scientism, the first belief you should give up is scientism. Yeah. Because science says nothing about scientism. Yeah. Because it's a philosophical belief, and science only talks about like properties of physical objects. That's far. Okay. So it's a self-refuting, like, and as soon as, like, I don't know any philosopher who subscribes to this position, because as soon as you start thinking about it, it becomes like, oh. Here's another thing, is that science itself, for its operation, depends on math. But science can't discover what things are valid in math. It's not part of the scientific method to tell us what, or logic. It's not part of the scientific method to tell us what our valid inference is. And yet, science depends on using valid deductive and inductive inferences. And it's not part of science to tell us what correct arithmetic calculations are. And yet, it uses them all the time. So if you hardcore subscribe to scientism, the first thing that you should give up is like the very foundations that make science possible in the first place. So you undermine the very project. But still,
switching to being like some kind of empiricist.
Right. Yeah. So I think what I wanted to emphasize, okay, is that so really when people talk about this belief, like I don't believe in God, I only believe in science, right? From Nacho Libre. Like I hear a lot of people say that. Okay, but what I'm trying to encourage you guys to do is actually treat that as more of an attitude, rather than treat it as like a strict, rigorous philosophical belief. Because really, once you get, like, it's pretty easy to show that can't possibly be like your serious, considered philosophical opinion. Okay, really what you probably mean is some form of empiricism. Okay, and actually I should throw that up on the board. We'll talk about it. Okay. So really what they have in mind, I think, is more of, again, an attitude that says, look, over the last 300 years, science has been incredibly successful as a method for delivering all kinds of knowledge about the world. And every year, science tells us new things that run contrary to a lot of things people used to believe. But it's like a really, really good method, and it gives like really, really good, firm, certain results. So I'm done with all that spooky stuff, and I'm done with all those traditional beliefs. And from here on out, I'm only gonna, read the R Science Reddit, okay, and just the only thing I'm gonna believe is the stuff that I see there, because I've just lost faith in every other source of knowledge. And science, though, sort of systematically, as just like a steady march, has been overthrowing everything else. So it seems just like this juggernaut that's unstoppable, and it seems like really surefire, it seems objective, it seems certain, okay, and it conveniently doesn't have any spooky stuff. And by that I I mean, it kind of does. It has like black holes, which are kind of weird, spooky in that sense. But it doesn't have any ghosts. It doesn't have any spirits. It doesn't have any afterlife. It doesn't have anything that ultimately we can't explain. Okay. I think another part of this attitude is actually a very noble one. It's an attitude that says, look, the universe must be, at the end of the day, explicable. It must be the sort of thing that we can understand. Okay? We haven't gotten there yet. There's a lot of corners that we don't understand, but hey, 200 years ago, we didn't understand how electricity worked. And now, iPhones, right? A long time ago, we didn't think we could fly, and now we do. And like, there are a lot of things that we used to not understand that now we do. So like, the trajectory seems like it's in our favor. That if we just keep on pressing for another 1,000 years, like, sooner or later, we're going to understand it all. And so actually, I think that this is a noble attitude to have, because on the one hand, it sort of just has a basic fundamental faith in the orderliness and elegance of the universe. And it also has a basic faith in the capacity and nobility of a human being to understand that elegance and that order. That means we're order perceptive, right? That there's a relationship of fitness between our intellect and the universe, which is kind of beautiful, if you think about it. Right? And where does that come from? Carl Sagan explained that. Okay, but still, there's this rock bottom sort of faith in man and the nobility of man, which is kind of cool and beautiful. Also maybe hubristic, okay, but it has its upsides. Okay, does this make sense? Yeah? Okay.
What about all the people that would have died before not knowing that?
Yeah, so the faith is not in any individual person, but in us, like, as a species, right? That humanity, right, is such that if we just keep on pushing and keep on progressing, one day we'll understand everything. And it's sort of like maybe it's an asymptotal relationship, right? Like, maybe there isn't like a year, like in the year 2946, we will discover the last thing there is to discover. Okay, but that in principle, the mysteries of the universe are open to our gaze, and that we can forever chase after them and will not hit any fundamentally inexplicable dark corners of the universe.
So, Isaac has.
Yeah, this is very prevalent. Like Carl Sagan, I already mentioned, but you get this attitude a lot. Yeah.
Does this involve specifically asserting that it's by science that be the case? Yeah. And I'm sort of doing a shotgun approach, describing a number of different attitudes that often go together. They don't necessarily. So I mean, you might have this sort of super faith in science that says science is the only way we know anything about anything, but I don't believe that ultimately it will discover everything. I might believe, yeah, there are some mysteries of the universe that are just fundamentally beyond discovery. But if something's discoverable, it's only discoverable through science. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, empiricism. Empiricism is actually a philosophical position, okay, that says all knowledge is fundamentally grounded on empirical observation. That's where it gets its name. What is empirical observation? Observation through the five senses. What you can see, touch, taste, hear, and feel. Okay. Now, that extends to what I can see through a microscope, what I can, hear through a stethoscope. Okay, so I can use instruments to extend my capacity to see, touch, taste, hear, and feel things. Okay, but at rock bottom, the source of my understanding is what I can see, touch, taste, hear, and feel. That's what grounds all knowledge. Okay? And so if I have a proposition or a belief that cannot be sort of ultimately trace its roots back to empirical evidence, then I can't claim to know it. Okay? At best, I can claim it as a nice belief or a hypothesis. Yeah. But anything that I claim to know must ultimately trace its roots back to what I can see, touch, taste, hear, and feel. Okay. Now, empiricism is a serious philosophical hypothesis. Okay. I kind of made snarky comments about scientism because I think as soon as you start really taking it seriously, it defeats itself. Empiricism does not. Okay. I myself am not an empiricist. I think there are very solid, good arguments against empiricism. Okay. But it's a serious philosophical theory system that has a very hefty pedigree. Okay, and you should know that. Most people who are mature naturalists are empiricists. Okay, and you can see why the two have to do with each other. Because it's a little bit hard to see how a belief about God could fundamentally be grounded on empirical observation. You can't see God. If you saw it, it wasn't God. Even with Jesus, right? Like seeing Jesus, well, you saw his humanity. Okay, you didn't see his divinity. Okay, if you saw it, by definition, it was in space and time. Okay, so empiricism has a tendency to rule out belief in anything that's outside of space and time. Anything that's non-spatiotemporal, we say. Okay, because everything that you can see, touch, taste, hear, and feel is going to be a spatiotemporal object, naturally, because that's the sort of natural field of objects at which our empirical observations have to do. Right? So you see why those go hand in hand. Okay, but of course, empiricism doesn't, on its own, say that science is the only way. Okay. Empiricism also doesn't, on its own, say that the only real things are the smallest things. Okay? Because in fact, empiricism is in tension with reductive physicalism. Now, there are ways of resolving that tension, but if you think about it sort of commonsensically, what I can immediately see, touch, taste, hear, and feel is medium-sized dry goods. Right? In fact, people don't see atoms. Right? So it's a little bit weird if you start from empiricism as a base conviction, as what's really real is what I can see, touch, taste, hear, and feel, and knowledge is my knowledge of that, to then say, oh, but there aren't really any tables in the room. All that there really are the atoms or quarks or whatever that make up the tables, and table is just a convenient shorthand for this aggregate of atoms. In fact, I don't see that at all. Okay, no human being ever has. I mean, that's a long way off after a number of intervening hypotheses to get to the idea that the table is really just made up of tiny particles. Now again, there's a way of resolving that tension, but prima facie, right, empiricism as a theory of knowledge stands kind of in tension with reductivism of every stripe. Okay. Okay, awesome. Any questions so far? These are the big words that I wanted to get out of the way.
I wrote down for empiricism, all knowledge is fundamentally based on observation or sensory evidence.
Empirical observation. Yeah.
Empirical observation. Is that saying all knowledge is based on that? Is that equivalent to saying all reality is connected to that?
No, because empiricism is an epistemic theory, not an ontological theory.
Okay, so it's not making an assertion about
right.
that all reality is knowable or anything like that.
Yeah. So if you had a, I don't even know what the word for it would be, call it discoverabilism or something. The idea that the only real things are the things that we can know about. Yeah. Which once you say it, to me it sounds obviously false. But I think to a lot of people it's true. It sounds true, right? That, well, if we can't seen a ghost. I don't know that they exist, but I believe in them. They exist. Right? That's not logically inconsistent. Okay. It's weird. I don't know anybody who believes a conjunction like that. But it's not.
Goes against that attitude.
Exactly. And that's what I'm trying to get across to you guys, is that the reason these things all go together is not so much because they logically have to go together, as much as it is that they're different expressions of a single underlying attitude, which is, again, an abhorrence for spooky stuff. Okay, a desire to sort of cleanse or purge our worldview of all the snake oil, all the extra mystical weird stuff, magic and gods and spirits and stuff.
Is it possible to be empiricist?
Yeah. What you would have to give up if you did that is one of two propositions. Either the proposition that no one's ever seen God, or there is no such thing as empirical observation of the mind, or the proposition that you can have knowledge of God. So you could be a theist in the sense that you believe that God exists, but you couldn't know that God exists and be an empiricist. Right? So you can see why those stand in tension, but it's logically possible. Right? There's actually this weird dude, I think he's out of UVA, that actually does believe that God is like a spatiotemporal object, like in the universe, and that we can like see him like with I guess a big enough telescope. Yeah, he calls it cosmotheology. Yeah. So it's possible, but it's weird, right? Like why would you? Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now I wanted to talk briefly about these two terms that people throw around. Now I will caution you, don't get into an argument with an atheist about what the term atheism means. Let people self-identify however they want to self-identify. Okay, if they want to throw words, But it's important for you guys to understand how the terms are generally used, and I hear people use them in sort of laymen use them strangely all the time. Okay, both atheism and agnosticism are positive beliefs. They're not the absence of a belief. All right, let me repeat that. Atheism is not the absence of a belief in God. It is the positive belief that there is no God. So see, we're back to playing with negations here. Okay, you might think it's word games, but it's not. A lot of people just don't have any real belief or conviction about the existence or non-existence of God at all. So they don't believe in God. In the sense that they just don't have a belief about God. I actually think that describes a very large number of people. Okay? But those people aren't atheists. They're just non-believers. Okay? An atheist is someone who has the positive conviction, they actually do believe, that there isn't such a being as God. You see the difference? An atheist is someone who has a positive belief that there isn't such a being as God. Right? So atheism is actually a knowledge claim. Okay? It's just as hefty a knowledge claim as theism. Right? Theism says there is such a being, atheism says nah, there ain't. Both of them are making a claim about the universe. The person who just says, I don't know, I don't believe in God, they're neither. They're not a theist or an atheist. They're just an unbeliever. Or whatever you want to call them. A nun on the census records. Okay? Agnosticism, similarly, is not someone who doesn't believe either way. Okay? But is someone who positively thinks that knowledge of the proposition God exists is impossible. Let me say that another way. An agnostic is someone who positively believes that it's impossible to know whether there's a God or not. That's very different from someone who just says, I haven't personally decided yet. An agnostic is someone who's actually committed to the idea that they will never know. That it's impossible to know. That question is unsettlable. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, I think, when you're talking about, like, teenagers especially, talk to a bunch of teenage guys, you'll find gobs of teenage boys saying, like, oh, I'm an agnostic, meaning, I haven't made up my mind yet. Okay. That's fine, they can call themselves whatever they want. But in the literature, okay, agnostic, if somebody says, if a philosopher says, I'm an agnostic, that usually means it's an epistemic claim, saying that knowledge, it's impossible to settle the question of God's existence. Okay? Committed neutrality, not just undecidedness. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Now I want to talk about free will real quickly. You can see why these go together. Okay? Determinism is an ontological theory about the nature of the universe. Okay? And it's easy to see why it would follow from reductive physicalism. Okay? If the only things that really exist are physical things, and physical things can all be reduced to microphysical things. In other words, this table doesn't really exist. The only thing that really exists is the quarks that make up the protons, neutrons, and electrons, that make up the atoms, that make up the molecules that make up this table. But even molecules and atoms don't really exist. The thing that really exists is the quarks. And actually, in 50 years, we might discover that they don't really exist. The thing that really exists is the thing that makes up the quarks. Make sense? Right? If you believe that, if you view the universe that way, and you add to it another philosophical thesis, which is the thesis that all physical things interact with each other by a law of deterministic cause and effect. A simple way to think about that is billiard balls. Okay? That all the universe is, this is very simplistic, but run with it, okay? All the universe is just a giant collection of lots of little billiard balls banging around against each other. Okay? Now, if you think about a table of billiard balls, if I know the position and the velocity of all the billiard balls on that table, I can predict where all the billiard balls are going to be. Okay? At any time. Say that you give me a starting time equals t equals 0. Okay, I can predict where the billiard balls are going to be at t equals 1, t equals 2, t equals 3 seconds. I can predict where all the billiard balls are going to go because they behave deterministically.
How would they answer what starts the first billiard ball?
Well, that's a separate question. Okay, so maybe they don't. Maybe they have an answer to it. Maybe they don't. Okay, but given the fact that I have all the billiard balls in an initial position, okay, I can predict where they're going to go. Okay, so this is two beliefs that go together. The first belief is all that there is little billiard balls, metaphorically speaking, and the interactions of those billiard balls behave exclusively according to deterministic cause and effect.
Both of those combined.
Both of those lead to determinism. Yeah. Inevitably. Yeah. So determinism is the philosophical thesis that all events in the universe have to go exactly the way that they're going to go. Okay? That there is exclusively one way that things are going to be at this second, and at this second, and at this second, and at this second, and 10,000 years from now. And all of that, it has to go exactly that way. And in fact, I was gonna be in this room right now on June 18th, or July 18th, what day is it? 19th, 2016, from before the last ice age. It was inevitable that I would wind up in this room because it's just billiard balls leading up to this point. Which is a very long, very complicated billiard ball interaction. Okay. Now, determinism, if you just listen to the thesis, okay, it actually doesn't require that what I just described is scientific determinism or physical determinism. There are other forms of determinism. You might be a theological determinist. you might think that I was going to end up in this room today from time immemorial, from before I was born, because God forced the path to be exactly one way. Okay? Or something else. Okay, there are other philosophical mechanisms that people have posited for the universe, the story of the universe taking exactly one path and having to take that path. Okay? But I think it's easy to see how you can lead from some basic scientific premises plus a philosophical add-on and get to physical determinism. Does it make sense? Everybody get it? Yeah? Okay. Now, important side note. 20th century physics has showed that the second premise of that argument I just gave you is actually false. That the interaction of the smallest little billiard balls actually is not deterministic. That once we have a set of conditions, those conditions do not inevitably lead to a second set of conditions a second later. At best, we can predict the probability of a certain second set of conditions a second later. Now, the probability is extremely predictable and on a very nice bell curve. Okay? But it's still only a probability. And so what that means, if that's true, if that deliverance of quantum mechanics is true, and actually, I'm glossing over, there are different interpretations of quantum mechanics, okay? So the most popular interpretation of quantum mechanics, called the Copenhagen interpretation, says that what we observe as a measurable probability actually reflects the indeterministic nature of the universe at the bottom level. Okay, but there are other interpretations. So I believe it was Bohr, right? The Bohr interpretation of quantum mechanics actually says, no, that's just a feature of our epistemic situation. It's a feature of our ability to run certain experiments, et cetera, but at base, the mechanism is deterministic. Now, why is the Copenhagen interpretation more popular? For the same reason, folks, that materialism gave place to physicalism. Because the only reason you would have for thinking that underneath what appears as sheer probability, that underneath there's a deterministic mechanism, is just a fundamental blind faith that determinism is true. So it seems ad hoc. Like, why would I continue to believe that in the face of the evidence? It's kind of contrary to the scientific spirit, so to speak. Okay, when all the evidence points to the fact that actually not, it's not deterministic. Okay, anyway. So, determinism. Now, there's two versions where you can go with determinism, called hard determinism or soft determinism. Now, what I need to emphasize, a lot of my 100 students get this wrong. Okay? Both of these are versions of determinism. They both believe that there was exactly one thing that was going to happen, and that ultimately there was no possible way that it was not going to happen. I was going to be standing in this room giving exactly this lecture on this date, in this place, no variance since before I was born. That's what determinism says. Okay, so what's the difference? Hard determinism says, so if that's true, then therefore you have no free will. And therefore you have no moral responsibility ultimately for being in this room, etc., etc., etc. So because you were destined to be standing in this room on this day, this time, you don't actually have any real free will. So free will is just an illusion. You think that you chose to be here and that you could have been somewhere else. That's purely just an illusion. Okay. Soft determinism, okay, says, well, if that's true, then what we need to do is we need to redefine free will. And rather than thinking that free will means having the ability to do something other than what you were destined to do, free will just means doing what you want to do. Never mind that what you want to do was pre-programmed, and that was pre-programmed, and that was pre-programmed, and that was pre-programmed. As long as you like it, you're free. Okay? So the fact that I'm standing here giving this lecture, and it's not like anybody's got a gun to my head, I'm not in restraints, I'm enjoying myself, that's free will, and so I can be held responsible. Never mind that I absolutely could not have done anything else. Because since before I was born, it was pre-programmed that at 6:45 on July 19th, I would have a desire to teach. And that desire comes from my brain chemistry, and that desire comes from the bouncing around with billiard balls in my brain. Does it make sense? Yeah? Okay, both of these schools, repeat after me, they both believe that there's no wiggle room. Okay, the way a lot of my 100 students think about it, because they weren't listening or something, they think hard determinism is like full-on determinism, so there's no free will, but soft determinism is like a compromise. Like, most of the time you're determined, but every now and then maybe you have a little bit of freedom and you can do some, you have some wiggle room, you can do something else. Okay, that's not how it works. Soft determinism just is full determinism. It's just soft because you redefine freedom so that freedom is doing what you like. Right? Does it make sense? Okay. Both of these are extremely prevalent in the camp of people that believe these things. Okay? And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is, I think there's still this holdover from pre-quantum physics days. Okay? That back in the pre-quantum physics days, everybody thought science says that the universe behaves deterministically. So some version of determinism has to be true. So we've got to deal with that. Either we've got to come to terms with the fact that we don't have free will, or we've got to redefine free will somehow. Okay? And I think that even when quantum mechanics showed up onto the scene, people sort of still have this inertia of, oh, well, smart scientific folk don't believe in free will. That had become the culture. Okay. Or smart scientific folk believe in determinism, and therefore not free will. So even when we technically give up on full-on determinism still, okay. But another part of it is, I think, much more sophisticated and intelligent, which is, well, okay, hey, look, think about these quantum mechanical interactions. Even though they're not deterministic, they seem at best to be dice rolls. Probabilistic poofs. And that ain't freedom either.
Yeah.
Okay? Like, if my decision to murder somebody comes down to quantum mechanical dice rolls in my brain, that's really not any better in terms of my moral responsibility than deterministic billiard ball interactions in my brain. Right? So the attitude goes like this. Look, quantum mechanics, mandates, okay. However it turns out to be, you still don't get traditional free will, so forget about it. And the law of large, so all these quantum mechanical interactions are super, super small, and there's like gajillions of them all the time. And the law of large numbers says that on the whole, those probabilities will smooth out, so to speak, okay? And you'll get, at the macro level, what amounts to purely deterministic behavior of medium-sized dragons. And even purely deterministic behavior of, like, large molecules. Okay, does this make sense? So they say, effectively, the universe is still deterministic, even at, back to Newtonian mechanics. Okay, so no free will. Alright.
I can't think of the term right now, but don't Christians, like we as Christians, don't we have the belief of, it's not faith, but it's like something.
Well, be careful with terms. Predestination is a thesis about salvation. Predestination is the thesis that certain people will be saved, and maybe we're silent about the people who won't be saved. Double predestination is the belief that certain people will be saved, and certain other people will definitely not be saved from before they were born. They were predestined to be either saved or not saved. Okay. that actually is compatible with indeterminism about the rest of our lives. It might be the case that I have the freedom to do anything I want. I can go here, I can kill as many people as I want to do, I can do nice things over here. I have total freedom to pick my major and marry whomever I want, but God has fixed whether I'm going to be a Christian or not. Right? So, predestination as a thesis about salvation is actually logically independent of determinism and indeterminism. Now, there is another thesis, though, which most people who believe in predestination also believe this other thing, which is called theological determinism. The view that something about God makes it the case that from before you were born, all the events of your life were mapped out. And that you don't have any wiggle room. It's not up to you whether you sinned on Monday or not. Right? That was part of your story from before you were born. Make sense? And a lot of Christians do believe that. I don't believe that. I actually think it's a very harmful belief. But a lot of Christians do believe that. Is that what you're asking about? Yeah. You should know about that a lot of Christians don't believe that. Right? In fact, the overwhelming majority of Christians through history have not believed that. Yeah, so Calvin was a proponent of that, but so was Luther. Although Luther's a little bit sketchier on the details. Calvin has this virtue of saying everything like super explicitly, whereas Luther is much more like rhetoric. He says like these really like blasty things, but Luther doesn't always like settle down and actually sort of like spell it out exactly. So there's room for debate about what Luther actually thought. But Calvin's not the first person to think this. It's not like he just invented this. Not in Geneva. In Geneva, they persecuted the other people. Right? So it really depends on where you were.
Conflict.
Yeah.
I'm trying to emphasize it.
Yeah, there was a lot of conflicts. Yeah, like a century of conflicts. Different groups burning the other people. Yeah. But he wasn't the first person to think that. In fact, there's this sort of, historically, there's always been a strand of these sort of fatalists. Okay? And a lot of people trace it back to the sort of last days of Augustine. In his old age, Augustine, in his battle against the Pelagians, sort of started making more and more and more extreme statements in order to fight the Pelagian heresy. And it tended more and more and more towards sort of a hard theological determinism. He even says in a letter to a friend, the Ad Cilicianum, he says, "I have struggled long and hard on behalf of freedom, but the grace of God has prevailed." Implying that you can't really believe in the grace of God if you believe that humans have any substantive freedom at all. Yeah. So now that we're talking about it, I feel like I have to say something about it. I believe that that's heresy, and I believe that that's blasphemous. Because I think if you step back and think about it, that means that God himself has predetermined from before we were born whether we were going to sin or not sin on a particular day. Okay? So you're left with two options. Either you say that God himself is the author of evil. He, in fact, was the one that made it the case that this evil thing was going to happen, which I think is blasphemous. Or you say that sin is not actually evil. And let's actually think about, we're not just talking about our little interactions and tiffs here. We're talking about rape. We're talking about murder. We're talking about the Holocaust. We're talking about people skinning children alive for fun. That God decided before any of these people were ever born that that specific thing was going to happen on that specific day. And either he's the author of that, pure and simple, and it's evil, substantively evil, or it's not evil. Both of which positions I think are blasphemous. Okay, so Calvinists like to fire back and say, oh, you just want to you really like your own freedom and independence. No, not at all. That's not even remotely close to the reason I believe in free will. to think that God had mapped out my whole life ahead of time. Because then I could have some confidence that it had a point. Like some of the heinous things that I've done had a point to them. Right? As it stands, so that would relieve me. I would love that to be true. Okay. But the only reason I believe in free will is I believe in the goodness of God. And I'm so committed to the goodness of God that I cannot admit that evil occurrences were pre-planned by Him. Now, I believe that God works all things together for the good of those who are called according to His purpose. And I think He has placed a destiny, so He has predestined that we will be conformed to the image of His Son. So we have a fixed future that we're hurtling towards. And I believe that He is capable of taking those bad things and working them together in spite of our rebellion against His will. Okay. So I think that God is sovereign and has control over the timeline and engineers events to go the way that He wants them to go. But He doesn't determine literally every single event. Does it make sense? Yeah? I got totally off. We got track on that. Okay, libertarianism is just the denial of hard determinism. Libertarianism says, no, we do have free will, so therefore the universe is not deterministic. Okay? That I could have eaten Wheaties this morning, or I could have not eaten Wheaties this morning. And there's nothing about my antecedent conditions 2 days prior that made it the case that I had to do what I did. I really did have two possibilities for what I was going to eat for breakfast, and they were both real possibilities. Because I'm free. Make sense? Yeah? Okay, so we've gone over all the terms. Anybody want to ask some questions about how these all fit together? It's gone a little bit long.
So, speaking of like the common usage of agnosticism, a lot of people call themselves agnostic. And I think what they mean by that is that they, I kind of felt this way. I did believe that the knowledge of God was unlimited, but I basically said, why would God care know of His existence, or if we believe in His existence, then we don't really need the knowledge of it. But
So
that's
did
like
you-
pure agnosticism.
Yeah, did you positively believe that God did not exist?
Yeah, but I understand
Yes,
that's
that's
purely a belief.
Yeah, that's okay. You can be both, yeah. So you could say, I don't know that God
Yeah.
doesn't exist, but I sure do believe it.
Yes.
That's atheism. Yeah. What I was trying to emphasize is that atheism is not just mere,
No.
I've never thought about the question.
Yeah. Okay. And also, I missed, what were the two premises of determinism?
Oh, that all that there is microparticles, whatever they turn out to be, and that the interactions of those microparticles is purely deterministic. Is a cause-effect relationship, understood as deterministic cause-effect. You could even simplify that down to one premise as just a strong version of the PSR, the principle of sufficient reason, that all events have a sufficient reason. If that's true, then determinism is true. Any other questions? Make sense? Just golden? It's a claim about the nature of reality. No, it's also a claim about the nature of the reality. Libertarianism is actually a positive claim that we do have free will. Yeah. There's actually okay. So there's actually two questions. Is the universe determined? Alright. If you say yes, you're a determinist. If you say no, you're an indeterminist. And then you say, do we have free will? If you say yes to both of these, you're a compatibilist. That is a soft determinist. You think that the possession of free will is compatible with the universe being determined. How do you get there? You redefine free will into saying I'm free if I like what I'm doing. Okay. If you say yes, we have free will, so therefore the universe is not determined, I'm an indeterminist, that makes you a libertarian. If you say, look, we have good reason to think that the universe is determined, so therefore that means that rules out us having free will, that makes you a hard determinist. And nobody thinks this is stupid. I mean, there would be no motive for denying that we have free will. Because the sort of default position of all of us is that we do have free will. We can act other than we do. I mean, that's just from that's not even a religious position, that's just like our immediate awareness of our situation.
The universe is
Yeah, so here, there's maybe so somebody who believes, yeah, okay, I admit probabilistic stuff at the quantum level, but at anything larger than large molecules, everything behaves perfectly deterministically, or effectively. It all cancels out. That's still, they would still call themselves a determinist. Yeah. I guess depending on what questions you were asking. But yeah.
Is every single one of these epistemological?
All of these are ontological claims.
No, I meant like control.
No, empiricism is an epistemological claim. Scientism is an epistemological claim. These two are ontological claims. These two are ontological claims.
But they're only one of those two.
No, yeah, well, no, I was asking if all of those were one of those two. And I mean, they wouldn't make sense.
Well, I mean, so at some level, this division, isn't cut and dry, right? Because if I say, look, I think the only valid avenue towards knowledge is through the five senses, then that commits me to the existence of the five senses. Right, so it has an ontological dimension to it. Similarly, if I say, look, I know that the universe is determined, a lot of the reason why people believe that is because they think that it's a truth of logic that all events have sufficient causes or something like that. And so is that an epistemological claim about how we make sense of events, or is that an ontological claim? The emphasis is definitely on the ontological side of it, but it has an epistemological dimension. The reason most people think that PSR is true is the principle of sufficient reason, is because they think look, every time we try to make sense of anything at all, we always look for a sufficient cause. So if that is going to be, if we know anything at all, then PSR has to be true. So it's tied in with epistemology. So it's not, we can kind of for convenience sake, cut them up into different branches of philosophy, but
Yeah.
when you get down to the nitty gritty, it's not always.
And one last thing. So we basically listed 1.5 epistemological claims on board. And scientism is kind of an epistemological claim. It's also a good claim.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why we didn't talk about any of the other? Are those consider that separate?
Yeah, because they don't fit in this shotgun cluster of ideas. Because most people who are Platonists or rationalists or Thomists or Aristotelians about knowledge aren't naturalists. The closest that you come is, it seems to me in my very narrow field of work in ancient philosophy, there's a small group of people who are sort of hardcore Aristotelians about knowledge and are hilomorphists. And they would call themselves naturalists, but not physicalists, because they believe in form and matter. Okay, and science doesn't posit form. They're naturalists because they don't believe that any of those hylomorphic compounds, that is, a form matter compound, is non-natural, is supernatural. But you're not, like, in ordinary conversation, like, see, remember I'm trying to, like, kind of prepare you guys to, like, go talk to, like, people and share the gospel. I'll bet you $100 you're not going to run into any of those people at a coffee shop. Watch that happen, like, kids are all sitting at cafe, my buddy Ollie is just, like, hanging out. Actually, Ollie's a nice. Yeah. Okay. We can sit around here and talk about it